guess I should do it this way. Okay, now we're recording to my computer. So, all right. So, for this game, which is just goes under the very bland working title of like organizational game, we can come up with a better one. There's currently four parts, four fields that I kind of drafted, and realistically, we can probably test maybe two of them. That's okay. I think that's fine to get a picture of it. But I'll kind of describe very shortly what those parts are. Let's start with the premise. So this is based on the game called Universalis, which is I think about 2002. There's a couple of versions. It's a very, very small game. I think ultimately the two versions sold about maybe 1,000 copies. I actually know some of the people who were making the second edition, so I think I know the numbers fairly accurately. And it's a very interesting game. It comes from very kind of rich gaming culture, which was around this forum called XORG that was creating very interesting game models that are actually highly influential today, which is not known by most people, but they are. But it's kind of an outlier even in that culture because it took something weird at that time, which is tokens. They call them coins, but token-like structures, and made them the whole engine of the game. And the game starts from nothing. So you generate the world or the setting, however you want to think about it, which also could be called organization, hint, hint. And then you actually kind of run the world, the setting, the organization. Like, how do events take place in it with the same tokens? And you resolve conflicts, whatever they are, challenges, considerations, also by tokens. So it essentially took this task before crypto and actually developed certain interesting paradigms which are still, I think, useful if you think about social and tokens today, which hasn't really percolated to crypto itself. And this is why I think it's an interesting starting point. It's also somewhat problematic. Both of the editions are badly edited, or let's say the original makers made like the documents confusing, and I think they can be made better, which is a really fertile ground for hacking. Essentially, like you can make the game better, but I also think that it has really good ideas. But from that basis, looking at it like, oh, okay, so the game has tackled with several issues. The generation, whether it's a world, realm, organization, whatever, of something utilizing tokens as the organizational structure of it. Then the running of whatever has been generated. And finally, like the solving different desires, etc., from the same tokens. And roughly speaking, that's all you need for organization. Like, of course, you might add other parts, but you introduced all the main parts, so to speak. So, how to hack it, or how I packed it to be kind of more modular, I'll go through the four parts that are drafted roughly in a working model. One is initiation, which is what I could call like the starting from nothing situation, where you essentially start from discussion, like that people can come together, whether it's fictionally, so to speak, or seriously, to build an organization in itself, and how they utilize that conversation to become let's say, the skeleton of an organization. And that's the first part I have mechanics for. There is a kind of enhanced version of an earlier draft I made. But the second part, which didn't exist earlier, is uh, is about scenes. And why I call them the scenes is I wanted to introduce a different word, but essentially the scene is what the organization consider a project, any kind of endeavor, but even potentially a situation of decision. Of course, project contains also decisions, but that's all the more reason to bring them together. Um, so, like, how do we introduce a scene which can be a start of a project or a definition of a project to start in this sort of token manner as related to this game? Then I have a part which is about challenges or considerations, which is like how do you play the when someone wants to introduce a question or some kind of a challenge to somebody else's definition of an organization, which I think is generally needed. Not everything is always agreed upon, but how do you kind of bring this token model to here? And also, the original game contains such an issue. This is a kind of modified model for that. And finally, I have a model that can be roughly thought of as offers, but for Axeli, who knows me talking endlessly about offers, this is a different one because it's kind of comes from the game, and it's actually taking the scene model and turning it into something that can be thought of as external. Like how does the organization create the scene outside of itself? So that allows you, of course, do the traditional things like offer a passive thing like, hey, we offer this, you can get it this and this way. But they also allow for creation of kind of playgrounds that you create a scene that you haven't fulfilled, it's not yet ready, but it's offered for others as well. So that's four scenes: initiation, scenes, considerations, and offers. And uh, and for this, I could just open Google Doc for us to use. Let me just do two things at once, which is uh, that's I have to make this editable. It's always time now, and I'll share it in Zoom. But if somebody wants it in Telegram, that's also fine. I can post it there. And the document should just have a title of an org game. But check it if it works for you and if you can type on it. And it's meant to kind of, yes, seems to work. So I propose that we at least start with the initiation because it kind of makes sense. Like all the other parts kind of depend on that you have something, and so that would be my first proposal. And I have like set of rules that is simple enough to describe in 2 minutes or even less. And then we can see where we move from there. Is that okay with everyone? All right. So the setting, the premise for our game is that we are here to create an organization. And we can set this to be like, this is not, we're not writing in blood. We're writing in what I think of as kind of play reality, which is like inside a game. You can think of it as fiction, you can think of it in many terms, but I think play reality seems to be, as I've been testing it, something that speaks to people. It's also, by the way, the reality of all arts. Like, where does theater piece exist? It's kind of play reality. it's like read differently. And whereas a writing of a book of a real place like Berlin, but in the sense of fiction, it's taken as, yes, this is, I'm using all the concepts of Berlin or London or whatever, but I'm not thinking that this is really London or Berlin. Um, so we can make this organization into play reality. Now, another thing which is maybe, or should not be maybe the main topic today, is that this play reality is actually a kind of a very underutilized concept. You can actually flip play reality to be real reality and kind of utilize it in different ways, which is not really used even in games. But that's a whole other topic for another time. But for now, I think it's like we are creating it in play reality in fiction. And how it works is, I'll give you the main summaries. We start as a conversation, what would we like to create in this play reality. Along this conversation, you have one move, which is slotting a token. We'll come to how you get the tokens in a second. What do you slot the token in as a particular framing of a phrase? Could be your phrase, by the way. So, for example, somebody says, I would like that the organization concentrates on like creating playful social forms, and you like that, and you take exactly those forms, those words, creating playful social forms, or some other phrasing. You say, I slot the token here. This starts a subloop in game terms, which is like, now that you've done it, and you say, I slotted the token here, everyone now has the right of, first of all, that starts its own discussion. Oh, okay, that's interesting for you. How can you describe why it's interesting to you? But they have a right of soft veto, even. That is that after or along this discussion, they can say, oh, I don't like this. I can even veto it. So why give people the power of a veto is because it's a point of discovery. If you give people the power of veto, you can discover if you even have anything in common. Like, you could soften that to not be a veto, but the veto is actually useful information, because you're using the short session to see that if, oh, these people are vetoing everything I'm kind of proposing, this is probably not the right place for me. So even though it's harsh, it's actually useful. But if ultimately there is no soft veto, and after the description, maybe people ask, maybe it could be worded differently, and that's agreed upon. But ultimately, yeah, like if that lasts, the person who made the original slotting of the token writes the actual sentence. Maybe it ends up being creating playful social forms, and then they define whether that's a source token or an aim token. The source token and aim token, there's actually kind of three different tokens here, but for now we need just two. The source token is essentially a principle. So it's meant that for the organization, this is something that actually issues a new token every time it repeats. So this is kind of, you can use as a kind of comparison a traditional organization. That if organization has a principle, and every time we recognize that, okay, now we are actually functioning according to our principle, a new token is issued. Aim, on the other hand, is something that does not exist yet, but is something that should happen. And aim, as a definition, is something that issues every time it fulfills, and you can also set like steps or stepping stones, that every time it kind of shifts to a new stepping stone, it issues in itself. For now, we don't have to care about the intricacies of that. Like it can be very simple, but it's a point of thinking, oh, is this something that is now foundational stone for the organization, a source in a kind of principled manner, or is it something that is actually a kind of thing to aim upon, not yet existing, and simply put like source or aim into it. And one finally for this phase, we have a modular manner of defining what tokens we have. For now, we can simply say everybody has, say, 5 tokens. But you could have any kind of system for this. Like you could have that somebody has more tokens than the other ones for some other logic. That's like Lego, you can separate that part. And that's, of course, intentional. I don't think we have to make that part complicated for now. I think it's fine that we do like everybody has 5 tokens that they can slot. And finally, the practicality, whenever somebody slots a token and there is this discussion, there's no veto, and there comes the definition, it's that person's responsibility to write into the Google Doc. That's it. Any questions?
Pekka, summarize that in 30 seconds.
Okay. We start the discussion on a play reality organization. Every time you feel that something is more important than you want to make something as really part of that organization, you can slot the token. You slot it to an expression.
Like as in a declarative statement, or is it an action?
It's kind of like action on the frame of a declarative statement, yours or anybody else's, like a snippet from the conversation. And then that starts this sort of like, everybody can ask, let's say you did this, and everybody can ask you questions of why did you choose this, and then they also get the power of the soft veto, which is like, I don't like this. But if no vetoes come about, that becomes part of the organization, a slotted token. And then you have the responsibility of writing that down into the Google Doc. And these become kind of like nodal definitions of organizations. In the Google Docs, we cannot really do a network, but of course, because they're nodal, we could put many, many representations, post-its and whatnot.
Okay, so everybody says one thing, and you write that thing in the Google Doc. And if other people don't like that thing, they can say no. That's what we're saying, right?
No. We are having we'll start with just a normal conversation, but it's almost like you're filtering that conversation that, oh, that's something I think is important, and then you slot a token on that. So say, to turn this into practice,
and then you write it to the doc.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So rather than just starting from silence and people writing something that is probably quite far from each other, we talk. But when we pick, like frame out from that conversation something, that and you slot the token to it, that becomes potentially a form of organization if there's no soft veto. So.
Okay, so we have a conversation. We pick 5 things that we like from that conversation. Those are represented as tokens. And if other people don't like those, each one of those things, they can say no with a veto.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be 5, but however much you get. There is an additional layer that under every slotted thing, like a title, you can create a subtitle, but that's its own thing. You slot a token. Let's say I had this sort of playful social forms, creating playful social forms, and that was tokenized. Anybody could kind of pick a phrase that like emphasizing new forms of community, and that becomes both underneath that, but also its own token. But let's see. I don't think we have to think about too much with that, because I think that's enough rules for now. But yeah, and yes, so I'll say that this matters further in the sense that these tokens don't only become passive tokens, but they actually become issuing sources. So when you're setting this is important to me, when you later make a scene, the point is like whatever that scene correlates with the set tokens, they get issuance further. But that's, you don't have to think about it for now. Just know that this is meaningful for the further gain and further organization. All right. Any other questions, or are we fine with that? And if there's something fuzzy, I think rest of the rules can be kind of
Discovered
yeah,
on the
exactly.
way.
Yes. So okay. The
Faster process, Eric.
Yes, exactly. And now we can initiate this initiation as a conversation in play reality. What kind of organization are we making? The floor is free for everyone for a conversation about this.
Fun organization, hopefully.
Fun? Was that the word? Fun?
Fun, yes.
I veto fun. I hate fun.
I
There's
was
no token
expecting
yet.
that. I was expecting that.
What do you mean by fun? Like, that is always, for me.
Yeah, good question. Because I normally find very boring things fun.
Mhm.
So I guess it's quite subjective, but that we laugh a lot. That it produces our faces, smile on our faces. That's yeah.
Live, laugh, love. You guys have that in Europe? They don't. It's like those little platitude signs. You find them in tchotchke shops. It's like a very specific America. I could see this being only existing in certain parts of America.
Outside horrible coffee shops and stuff like that.
Yeah, or like if you have like a sibling who's like your polar opposite, and you go into their apartment, and they have these little kind of like inspirational placards up in different rooms. Like you walk into the bathroom, and it's like inspirate. You have to look at like this big sign that says inspiration while you're taking a dump.
Yeah, that's not the type of fun I'm talking about, of course.
Oh, I think fun is.
No, that's a good conversation. You're already kind of like finding what joins and what does not join. That's the whole point. But let me propose for both of you.
Let me ask.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask also Pablo. So why did you say that? Okay, fun. That you think that the boring things are fun. Let me just an example, like from our personal kind of we had just had this week our weekly meeting, and there's like this struggle of kind of I'm enjoying the organization, but some people just think it's so boring that they just need to resist it just for the sake of it, and it's driving me crazy. So I've been thinking like, okay, so could we turn it more? How could we turn it more fun for them too, or is it just that I just enjoy? I think the boring things are fun.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, fun for whom? For what? Fun in what context? What's the mood for fun? Yeah, sometimes you're not in the mood for fun. Yeah, that's a good question.
To quote Lisa Simpson, it's only fun if everyone can have fun, or isn't it? Is it part of the fun to damage or hurt or make fun of others?
No, I resonate with Lisa Simpson.
Okay, Lisa Simpson kind of fun.
Okay, note that everything is tokenable. Like everything that is being said, even your version of it, like you can revise something and then say, this is what I slot the token to. You have this sort of filter constantly present. But I propose to all of you, like that, or as a kind of question for Pablo, Eric, for this earlier conversation, that do you mean like an organization that is almost Chesteric or Chester-like in quality? That it's like has this sort of like, how do we make this fun or fun from this?
But then isn't that framing fun as the aim?
Could be.
No, I don't think so, because if the aim is fun, I don't know, like that sounds boring to me.
Yeah.
But it needs other aims. So anybody, if we think of other aims, and when you're playing in play reality, you can take everything that is serious. You can start to talk about things that are serious to you, because the only difference is that you're not writing things in blood, like metaphorically speaking. So I think it needs something else than just the quality of it. I
Yeah,
think
fun is not being very helpful.
I mean, it's a potential style, but then addition to style, you need kind of like more content-related approach, I guess.
Okay, so how about if we made this fishing organization?
Fishing organization?
Yeah, the fishing season has just started here at our lake.
I like metaphorical fishing. I think the Christian metaphor of fishing is always good, but I like the practical fishing is so different in different places. But like, for example, I would like fishing like for new models, new approaches.
Like
In
David
some
Lynch, like David Lynch's model, catching a
Yeah.
big fish.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah, like it's kind of like how do you write the script?
So we're fishing for messianic inspiration. That's what we're fishing for.
That's
Whoever
almost
speaks to God first wins the game, you know?
I'd like to be fishing for diagrams, like as an expression of the concepts. So to have something tangible that I can eat, so the diagrams can make it palatable for me.
I'm almost ready to make a slot a token, not just for the example, but fishing for like different operations, like whether it's diagrams or messianic. What was your phrase? Messianic
Inspiration.
Like fishing as an operational approach. Okay, let's do that just for testing, because everything is new. People are slightly.
Do you want to share the screen? Would that be easier?
I'll do that, but
Okay.
like it's also good that everybody comes to the document. I'll do the sharing anyway. But I'm just encouraging that.
Yeah. Okay, so are you writing? Yes, just show how to.
I'll put here. This is a draft, and now I'm opening this sort of questions for everyone as a style of operation. And because it can be something I said, that's the definition. And I put PK, or that's the mark that I put a token there.
And is is it an aim token or source token?
I didn't define it yet, because now this opens this kind of sub loop, which is like now you can kind of like question this, ask for more, or propose your own modifications to it, and then you have the power of the soft veto, which after that, if that kind of endures from this common discourse upon it, then I'll. But I think it's an like as a kind of precursor. I think it's an aim, because I think it's like one could say it's a principle source, like a principle, but I think it's actually developing this, and that's why I would put it as an aim. So maybe I'll put it here. That makes sense.
And if it would be source, would it be every time that we notice or we record fishing happening, the token gets
issued a new token? Yeah. Okay. So the point is like in games.
So I was fishing for an answer. Maybe it was.
Yeah, I mean this could be, and games often kind of like what is normally kind of, I don't know, semiotic in this sense, like does this adhere to the concept, often turns functional. And the difference between a thing that gets issued or essentially gains new value that can be shared in the organization is a different one from a thing that gets value whenever it meets a new goal. I actually want to make it an aim, because I don't want it to be too easy, because then the point is immediately like, okay, what would be these aims for it? And we don't have to define them now, but that is, I think, a useful.
Just a second. I'm sorry, I have to leave again.
No, that's okay. Like
Bye.
I know your situation, so
Yeah. Sorry. See you.
Ciao, Felix.
Bye.
Nice that you were here. So so I think it's of course, like, for the future, it's a question of how to define what would be the kind of aims, and what kind of what would fulfill it, what would be stepping stones towards it, and those would be the ways to get the token for it. But we don't have to kind of go through all of that now. The main point is, if you accept this or not as a starting point.
Yeah, can we talk more about fishing? Because I've done fishing, and there's, like, as far as I know, you can fish for like sport and then get a fish and then put it back, and or you can fish for food, right? And you can eat the fish. It's the only type of hunting I've done. Like, it's the only, I guess, the only animal I'm comfortable like killing with my hands. I don't know. Like, that was for me an experience, right? Like, I've never done that before. And eating it, right? So is that, like, are we in this raw sort of like hunting world of fishing, or in a more metaphorical sort of like reaching out?
I think it's more the sort of, do say.
That's a good question, really good question.
I
would go for the raw, like fishing for the operations and really like eating and embodying them.
I would maybe combine them. Like, it's not against the raw and the material, but maybe I'll write it this way. I'm keeping on modifying it. That it's like Lynchian.
So kind of if Pablo, okay, we are talking still, but I was writing the what is operation, but he could have written it also here in the document, like what is fishing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah, whatever way. Like, you can ask the questions out loud or write them down. Like this is my proposal, and however we process this right of like going through this, whether you accept this or not, whether it's text or speaking, that's fine. But
Yeah,
for me, it certainly contains, in addition to the concrete, because I'm slotting the token, it contains this sort of metaphoric fishing, like Lynchian fishing. And what I mean by that is, like, Lynchian fishing is like, it's kind of looking for and even waiting for the idea and possibility. That it's not that you just define it, but you wait in the kind of at the vicinity or facing the idea, and then something comes, and then you're like, what is that? And you start reeling it in. That's how he describes it. It's like you get this vague picture, and you start reeling it in after waiting, and then when you reel it in, becomes more distinct, and then you get the fish, and then you suddenly add something to the pot. But I'm thinking actually that it can be wider than just thinking of your own ideas. You can fish from the world. Like, the world is the sea.
Yes.
I'll add that too. World is the sea from which to fish. So so in this sense, like taking this approach that one of the key operations of the organization is to go fishing, is to look and to the world, that you look, oh, I'm actually here looking for parts that I could kind of pluck out, like you pluck the fish from the sea in itself, and like that form, this form, that form, and those would be part of the major operation of the organization. It's not against that, like, things can be created by themselves. Like, of course, other tokens can be put. Like, this is not kind of setting hard limits to anything, but it would be the sort of like that when you go out there to websites, whatever, you're fishing, and this would be
or in this group also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, of course, it's usable anywhere. But in this,
I'm ready to put my token there already. Or how did I do it?
so in this sense, like if you don't do the soft veto, you can keep all
I
your
don't need
token.
to.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you can put a sub token to it and kind of make a new definition, but it's kind of like semi-independent. Like we can do
Right.
it later. But if we are making this sort of
Mention
snapshots,
phishing. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Does anybody have a soft veto or a further question consideration on this? If not,
perhaps consideration.
yeah.
So perhaps I'd like to name the fishes or find like what kind of fish they are and try to articulate it when fishing. So what would I do? Would I write it down
Good
as
idea.
a consideration or?
Yeah, actually, so yes, definitely you could write them because I think so. This is kind of like trying to hit several birds with one stone. And the point here is that the game loop introduces this general conversation and then a sub conversation. So the setting of the token opens a new conversation. And the point is that the second conversation is actually useful because it starts to define a thing that somebody has picked as interesting. And it both brings like what is the social agreement or disagreement, but it also starts to define it. So I would give you like any bullet point under this is freely put, like we can test now since we're kind of in a testing mode. Let's put it so the rule that if you put a bullet point underneath about that, it's completely free for you to put. Like you don't have to put a token on that. So so you can write like your considerations underneath that because it's all kind of feeding, I think, in the sense of usefulness of what could come out of this and how this idea could become something more sophisticated, let's say. So so you can take the that as something you can add, and if we were in a normal situation, we might actually spend time here, but now that we're testing, we could give you the right to write that and then move back to the general conversation. If there is no soft vetoes, this token could be accepted. No soft vetoes, let's accept it. Typology is not set, but I'll put it like this. So, and then maybe I'll put a line which is just for the sake of making certain modularity here. Okay, we have phishing and the kind of concept of phishing, which is developing by itself. But what else would be in this play reality organization?
Not related to the fishing or still related to the fishing?
Doesn't have to be related to the phishing at all. It's related to the whole organization. So this was kind of one token put down, like you can make something associated or completely disassociated from it. Essentially, we're back to conversation of what are we doing together in play reality.
I mean, it is tangentially related to the fishing, but I'm thinking about the bait and the lure. You know, when you sort of like, you have a hook and you attach something and different types of bait, lure, different types of fishes. And there's sort of like a lot of patience and waiting, but there's a lot of intention in this action. How are we preparing this? Like, are we luring our fishing, or are we just like, are we fishing with our bare hands? Are we using tools?
What do you think?
I mean, I am all in for fully embracing the predatorial and the carnivorous. So yeah, I don't know. Fishing rod seems to me as a more detached approach to it. Fishing with your bare hands, maybe it's too harsh. Maybe puts you in a bad position. But a spear might be a good in between. I'm not sure.
put that as like I think that's a good question of instruments, metaphorically speaking, of this fishing.
So, yeah, okay, I got the, so it would be like, only spears, only in darkness, when it's dark, maybe with the light that you can see some things, and with the spear. Special ideas, special things can be fished like that only, maybe.
I'll put this like because this is actually an interesting developmental direction, spears in darkness, and I kind of translate that to that okay, if you're doing spears in darkness, which is also a common Finnish, or not common, but the known Finnish fishing method, by the way, that it's like, okay, you're looking for different models, but you're not just looking for them inside the fields where you know it they exist. You know, like crypto, you're not just looking at crypto projects, but you go out there in whatever, social media, different. So you go into the kind of wide world, and then whenever you find something, you could develop this sort of spearing. It's like when you find something interesting, you can spear it, which is like write immediately down the key point of it, which is like the point of your spear.
Good thinking, Becca. Good developing. Yes.
Yeah, but this is the whole point of the game, is to actually be the facilitator of development.
How about the darkness? What's the darkness? The darkness would be that you'll find the ideas or the concepts asleep, kind of for that their potentiality has not been realized in the context where they are, and then you
I think the point how that appears is like, say you find an idea for let's say economy from somewhere in the social media, but they don't think about it as part of the economy or part of token structure or whatever. That's asleep because it's not like, it's of course awake for its context, but it's asleep for the economy because it's not thought for that, therefore asleep. So I'll put like sleeping ideas, just putting like short note, expressions of the tip of the spear. And this is all kind of technique oriented in itself. And so that already is kind of interesting, I think. Like it's not some kind of like a magic solution to everything, but it's also like something different, like something like normally this sort of one could call it formality, maybe that's too much, but really kind of mechanics or approaches, techniques are not discussed. And now we are, I don't know, 5-10 minutes in, and we are already discussing like new techniques, which is kind of a direction where the game is doing what I think it's supposed to do. So that's my impression.
I get it.
And so, for example, I have a question, because so let's say I would like to add an aspect that would, anytime there is this kind of metaphor, then I would like that there is another metaphor generated. So we are looking through two lenses so would that be a source token, or is that not a right question to ask?
No.
Yeah, so let's say we have this fish metaphor, and we have this conversation, and for example, then I say, yeah, so we have a metaphor, we are elaborating it, and now I would like another metaphor for the same thing. So for example, I come up with that it's kind of also similar to gardening, and instead of spears, so would that be?
I mean, you could play a token for that, which, because
and as an idea that kind of sorry, because can you through this change of lens, that can you get something more out of the idea?
Because I would, for example,
Or-
call
or-
it like metaphorical triangulation, let's say, and every
Mhm.
time there's a metaphor,
Yeah,
let's
yeah, yeah.
find one or two, and then we have this kind of three.
Triangulate. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Really good.
I mean, that's already a good starting.
That's
yeah.
that's a token.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can write
Worth
it
of a
as a
token.
token.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
like I did, you can just write whatever you have right now, and then that opens this subloop. Oh, you're playing this token. Now we have this discussion on it, and you can change it. People can propose changes to it, etc. And then it's ultimately set if there's no soft vetoes. So, I like this direction, and you kind of describe it. But could you describe it further as a kind of starting, because you're introducing this token?
So for me, when I hear this kind of alive and rich metaphor, since it can be very enlightening, but also it can be hiding different aspects of what we are exploring. So I would like to kind of have a chance to, to make it a small practice, kind of epistemic practice, that anytime there is a metaphor which is elaborated, then let's add at least one or two and have a small discussion.
Yeah.
And perhaps contrast contrast those.
I like that as an approach.
So there could be, yes, gardening and then something shopping or something like even more weird, like yeah.
Actually, I would put like that kind of means that it's almost like gathering this sort of new operating metaphors, not passive metaphors, but operating metaphors, because we actually kind of created through this fishing an operating metaphor, which is about how do you function rather than what does it mean. And so and like this is a kind of interesting direction which I really like. So I'm certainly unlikely to veto this at all, and I like this direction, that this would be like. But you also had like the main topic which you started with, which is like whenever somebody brings some operation, it's up to kind of others to bring another approach. You know, I brought fishing, or I found something by fishing, you take it to gardening, and then it exists both in fishing and gardening, or whatever you take it. But it would be this, what you now call metaphoric triangulation, which is a nice concept, by the way, for it. But I like that all, like from my side, so I'm not gonna veto it. But do you agree with this kind of take on it?
Yeah, I guess so.
What about others?
Yeah, that sounds really, really nice.
Yeah, and
I like it too.
Yeah. Anybody who is against this?
Come on, Eric. We need to have a veto. What?
At least a threat of a veto at some point.
Oh, there's a constant threat. Don't worry. It's constant threat.
Threat is good. It pushes people to activity. I mean, there's bad threats and good threats, but some of them are good. So I'm actually ready, also because this is playtesting and we can kind of make a fast forward cycle, to just say this is good and give you, Jakob, the right to define this. Like, I mean, in kind of normal situation, we might see what you write down and then accept that and so on, but we kind of fast forward that, because we could at least put like a couple of tokens more and then test another part of this organization to have like a quick experience of this. So is everybody okay with that?
Yes, very much. Hey, Pekka, just sorry, I gotta go.
Yeah,
I have
sure.
another session starting still.
No, but it's good that you.
But this is great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is good, and also like there's good growth. We got possibly next week joining the meeting.
Yeah, and I want to continue this too.
Yeah. A new another also very experienced game designer who's a good person. So it's a good growth.
Yeah.
But we'll continue, and nice that you joined.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
But yeah, any objections, any vetoes, any objections to Jakub finishing this? I mean, we're in play reality, so it's not too serious. That's the no objections. Dada, we can elevate ourselves from the subloop to the main loop. Is that okay? Now we have fishing, and then we have this sort of metaphoric triangulation of this sort of functional operative metaphors rather than passive meaning-based metaphors as key of operations in this organization. But what else? Like it's like this is very active, but do you want to perhaps say something about the focus? Do you want to put a token down on something else? I mean, it's open to everything. Okay, if I'm the facilitator, I'll turn this into a question. What do you think about the focus and the content? Eric. Now I'm the hard facilitator. What would be the kind of focus and content of this kind of organizational operation?
The metaphorical, or just like in general, the fishing, the catching the big fish?
Or like from what sources to fish, and like what does this concentrate on?
Well, it depends. I don't know, dude. I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Look, I think I'm kind of losing it a little bit. It would help me if like we could just create like just make this itemized so I understand like exactly what we're talking about, because it doesn't, like, I feel like, are we talking about actual fishing, or are we talking about it in like the Lynchian sense? And like
more in the Lynchian sense, I guess.
So then like, for instance, like this process, what you're calling metaphorical triangulation, makes me think of social dreaming. And there's a very specific process that like the dreaming matrix, right, which you use to create collective vision around the subconscious. And so like, I guess like I just don't understand what we're talking about here, or are we developing a process for an organization, or are we developing kind of like random?
Okay, so we're using a process that can develop essentially kind of practical infinity of organizations. But the point now is, what kind of processes does it create for this forming of organizations?
This just feels too broad. Like I can't relate to this because I don't. It feels like it's just too. It's too broad. Like it would help me if we could just focus this down to something that's a bit more concrete.
You can put a token to focus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like that's your. You can make that call. Like, I mean, generally the structure, of course, has like this sort of starting from bird's eye view and then descending. Like every detail. First there was kind of nothing, then there was fishing, then there's like metaphoric triangulation, and slowly detailing itself. But that's kind of coming from general to specific and particular. But like, of course, you can say like you can start from the particular in the sense of saying, okay, what would be actually interesting for you?
Wait, is the line? So are we? Is the line separating two tokens?
Yes.
Then?
Yeah. It's
so that first thing is just one token.
Yes.
Oh, that was confusing. Okay.
And the PK stands for me, Pekko, and then there's Jakub, put the second one down. the
Right.
metaphoric triangulation. And this means that they are kind of slotted, they are more real in the organization. They kind of like suddenly have gravity, which is actually something that really comes from Universalis, by the way. I think it was one of its good inventions, that you can like discourse everything, but once you put a token down something, it becomes more.
Right. So if we're talking about this in the Lynchian sense, right, we go fishing, we find a fish, we gather operative metaphors, which is basically fragments, things of inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to first process those fragments
Mm-hmm. You're
into,
going, yes.
so like the second stage of that is you gather fragments of things, right? And then you have to start connecting them to create a tapestry, to create like a tapestry or connection.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, he describes like, well, I'll get really fixated on this one image of like the shiny red car. And then, you know, he ruminates on the shiny red car and trusts that which comes. And then he like all of a sudden finds a new a new fragment, which is like the green grass. And then all of a sudden the shiny red car is parked at a house in front of the green grass, right? And then that creates kind of like a scene that the story can then grow, right? So there needs to be like, once the metaphors have been gathered, they need to be woven together to create meaning, right? As opposed to just haphazard collection or assemblage.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And just FYI, I have to go in a few minutes. I apologize. It's just like more nonsense on my end.
No, that's fine. But how, like, if you want that, you could put a token down on that, which means it turns real, so to speak, into the organization, becomes part of it. So, so that's kind of composition or connection or.
Yeah, I guess composition could be a good word for that.
Composition from fragments or something like this. Yeah, like
okay.
So that's something like, do you have the Google Doc open?
Yeah, where is it? So compose collected metaphors, create structure that enables meaning.
Yes. And how would you go about it? And you don't have to know that, but now that you put that down, like it kind of gives you the
trust each thing that comes. I'm just taking this directly.
Yeah,
from
no, it's fine. Yeah.
Trust each thing that comes. Save each thing that comes. Assemble each thing that comes. Organize each thing that comes. Connect each grouping of things that came. And then visualize a macro structure or narrative that contains all of these things.
Wow, that even feels like another token, no?
Yeah, it's already there. I think it's another token, but I also like it. It's a really, like, from me there comes this sort of vision that there is like organization that has like one pool that is fragments, and then one that is compositions, and like whenever fragment is collected, it goes to the fragments, but then everybody can make compositions out of fragments, and like, or assemblies, whatever you want to call the compositions, but and then those become kind of possibilities, like and it kind of follows the principles that Eric set down, like you trust them, that is, you put them in the fragments and save them there, and but then anybody can assemble things from it. Like, oh, okay, if we take this operation of fishing and metaphoric triangulation, other operations that might grow, what can come out of that? Or somebody finds a topic and somebody makes a composition where we take the topic of, say, communities, and then it's about people fish for different communities and kind of we're using this auxiliary spear fishing. It's like finding like just the tip of the spear, like one sentence descriptions, and somebody kind of creates a composition where it's like different community forms in very short descriptions. That becomes something that organization now has as its resource, like the sort of composition of those together, or whatever comes out of this. I'm just kind of brainstorming of what kind of things could come out of there. But that's a really interesting imaginary organization, which we are in right here and now.
All right, I'm gonna let that be my mic drop because I have to go.
No,
Let me
it's
know
okay.
how it turns out. I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, and we'll try. I can try to kind of bring, like, it's precisely in this game engines. It's often like it's almost like you have this, that the game is actually not touching the surface, or it's kind of feeding everything that comes to the surface, but it's more in the background as a system. And that's the point of these rules of, you can set a token, one rule, or you have that move. And when the token is set, it becomes this process of thinking of what the token is. And then the main interest here, which is unusual for games, but completely possible, is like, does that actually create rich material? And another process could start from the bottom up, start from details, but that would be a different process. Of course, different people, different processes, and that's a whole question of its own. But like, yeah, that's what it's looking for. And thematically, I would say it's looking for variety. It's not looking for, this is the only way to make an organization. But it's the point that, is it interesting or useful for some, and what can it create?
Right. So it's in a sense like we're talking about a creative visioning process and defining a schematic for how to do that collectively, and then but while using like kind of an offer structure.
Yeah, like isn't or offer structure or game structure, like process or a game, like a game in this wider sense of contemporary game understanding. Like if you have rules, you kind of have a game. That's, but essentially the same thing that you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. I gotta go. I'll talk to you later.
See you. But okay, so Eric put this down. What do you all think?
Yeah, I like it. I'm thinking, because you mentioned there's like a pool of fragments and there's a pool of compositions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe there might be a pool in between, which is the way in which these compositions come together. Like if you have ingredients and you have dishes, then the recipe would be this pool. If you have cutouts and you have a collage, sort of like the way you put them together, the artistic method will be like, I feel there's like, maybe there's an algorithm or there's a thing in the middle, right? Like how these things get composed. A pool of methods, a pool of algorithms, a pool of recipes. Maybe this needs to be defined.
Yeah, actually, this, how would you define it? Like, I think it's a good one, or a good direction.
I think I would need to be, or that we would need to be more what the fragments are in order to find the methods that put them together into something. I'm not sure.
I kind of see that as potentially an aim, but how would we define the methods here?
Yeah, maybe my token, or I'm not sure if it's a token yet, but would be to be conscious of the processes that compose, that make the compositions. Like, be conscious of going from the fragment to the composition in a way that becomes part of a pool.
I would. How about this? I'm kind of proposing that as a token, what you're kind of aiming for. It's somehow collect methods of composition. I mean, the Eric's token already puts the compose there, but I mean, you don't have to agree with that. But like it kind of sounds like it's like collect or generate, or collect or develop methods of composition.
Yes.
And just
would you put it down?
Yeah, I can put it down.
Yeah.
Sorry,
perhaps,
can you repeat? Because you phrased it very, very precisely.
Collect or develop methods of composition, or library of methods of composition.
and please to clarify, so now those tokens, so for example, in Eric's token, I see a lot of different kind of, that it's not like elementary, that it's several kind of pieces or potential elements. So when this token would be coming to play, would we further operationalize it? How do we know that this is happening? Or
No, that's a really good question. And approaching this as a game designer or from a game designer's perspective, how I look at this is that, oh, this game needs a subphase, which is like at the end of this initiation, you can do editing. For example, what Eric has been said might be moved to a particular method, that or the kind of description that he has might become a method of its own, while the main topic might stay. But why I say I'm approaching this from a game designer angle is that whenever you have to solve something that is potentially a problem or a weakness, you just design a new part, or you kind of redesign the part. I think here, there might be other directions, but here it's pointing to me is that this is a good generational method, but it's also pointing out that the generation itself might transform the perspective towards the things that you're kind of laying down. So if you introduce like a sub round, like a second phase to this initiation, which is kind of polishing, finalizing, that could work in the following way, and I'm just brainstorming this, is that everybody who laid down a token has the right now to edit in the second phase the token. Like, we copy this document, make a new one, and then everybody has the right to edit, and then we have like a final round of like, do we accept the edit? The token is already accepted. You might want to have more details on that, but like that might be enough in itself. Like, and then you have a functional way of precisely approaching this, because I agree with you, like that the issue is there, that it's good to kind of like have some kind of way of modifying things and kind of moving them about after the initial generation, which kind of transforms the topics themselves a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But this is actually, I think, a really good topic also, in the sense that it becomes this sort of like how game design approaches things, especially in the sort of play testing or play storming, which is like testing a model that is drafty, is that this is what you precisely do. Oh, this works, this doesn't, or this works, but there's this problem. How do I kind of design a part or revise a part that I make the whole thing work and I retain the good parts? It's not more complicated than that, but and I do think, like, for me, it's already pointing to good parts, which is like what often bothers me. I mean, this is kind of a meta comment, but I'll keep it short. Is that when people are talking about, well, organizations or whatever, but like organizations often kind of serious in this wrong manner. It's kind of like, it's almost like shackled in the sense that people think only in ways that they normally think of organizations. And while this is in play reality, but the point here is like, this sort of opening of thinking space. And I do think it's kind of pointing out that once you kind of open it up, you start to think very much outside. This is like rather experimental and rather brave in a way, like in like how it's thinks about concepts and operations. It's not thinking like who becomes the graphic designer and who becomes the coder. Of course, all of these issues can be present here, but it's kind of like has a wider palette. But then like how to take that strength and then kind of file out, polish away the weaknesses. I think that's a solvable question, I think. But okay, so collect or develop a library of methods of composition. How I'm intentionally making these questions to test this, that when somebody lays down a token, you really give them the room to define. So how, Pablo, you would collect this library?
Yeah. Good question. I guess, as I said, being conscious of the ways in which one composes. Like, I wouldn't go on with an initial aim to compose in a certain manner, but after the fact, I would reflect on how a composition was made and try to generalize the method, for example.
Okay, yeah. So it's like an analytic composition, like or analytic method, deriving methods analytically.
I guess yes. Like if we were a jazz ensemble,
Yes.
and we would play, and
yeah.
we would
Okay.
have
Yes.
fun and be as expressive as we want, and then after the time we play, we're like, okay, looking back and be like, what happened here? How did this came to be? But not like restricting the moment of improvisation, but just being conscious about it after the fact.
Actually, those are really good parts. Like you could define both of these parts. Like, I mean, yeah, I said the phrase like defining methods analytically, meaning kind of afterwards. But then your example, like really concrete example, this jazz that you improvise and then you kind of look what kind of song structures or were there in the improvisation, and let's take those part. I think it actually should. I would kind of support that being part of this token definition because I think it's a really interesting one. Doesn't have to be only one, but I think it's a like jazz improvisation and after analysis of the improvisation to extract models. That is a really interesting and useful thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure how exactly to phrase it. But,
doesn't matter. Yeah, like you can put anything down and then like things can be changed from that. There is an idea which I've been thinking on the side, not just for this, but earlier even. But I think this is kind of bringing that idea into focus, which is you could call it kind of special purpose organizations. By that, I mean that in the normal world, we think of organizations often quite large and kind of like overpowering that you're a member of something, but and then that's kind of a holistic deal of things. But you could very much create like organizations, almost like special purpose groups that, oh, I'm part of this organization that only meets whenever we have something for it. And it's specifically designed as a vehicle to do this one thing. And I'm bringing that point of view because I think it's quite present as a possibility here. Like, it's very much like very close to game design. Like you play a certain kind of game because you want the feel or the process of that game. But an organization could function in a similar fashion. And for example, this is a good example. Like, oh, you have this sort of operative procedure in a way, and then sometimes you come together with certain people when somebody has fished something out, and then somebody brings other metaphoric operations to triangulate it. Somebody starts to compose those fragments in different ways, and something interesting or uninteresting comes out of it, and then it's going to be used or not used. But it's just that it's something that we allocate and see sort of functional in working groups and subgroups of organizations, but we don't really think of organizations in that manner. But it's of course completely possible and actually quite useful, I think. So yeah, I think that's a point of view perspective that is present in this current generated basis that we have here.
Yeah, thank you very much, because I will need to jump off also now. So yeah,
yeah, I mean, we have used quite a bit of time. The one thing I could, if Jakub, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I could describe the one of the other phases. I would do the scene just as a description to just give you the picture, because it also probably helps, like, oh, it's not just this. And then we can finalize from there, because like I think that's fine. And actually, if I would think of normal game design, which we kind of are, that this is something that actually could become something. This is actually very effective game design in itself. Like it's testing things and going forward. But just to give you some material, so the scene, I'll actually turn this to non-transparent. Can you see this? Like there is a scene like on the side of the. Well, I guess. Yeah, I could actually make it the whole screen. It makes it more easy. So there is the title scene. So this is the first 2 sentences are just summary, but then there is a kind of structure. There's more to it, but this is just a kind of short description of it. Like, so now that we have these tokens laid down and they're polished, etc., phases that we haven't had, but we could, like, they in themselves become issues. Like there can be a cycle in the organization that every meeting, maybe every month, a new token is issued from every slotted token, and the new tokens can be fed into anything that the organization does, which here lands under the concept of the scene. And how the scene works is actually kind of loaned how games do flow. Many games, or it's actually one of the most general structures in games to do a flow, like what happens, essentially. But how it practically works is, let's say if anybody can propose a scene, which is like, and then the responsibility for this initiator becomes that they have to describe it. And what they have to include into that is like the elements, different elements, one being the setting, which is kind of the premise. Like, what is our starting point? And then this can be completely project-like. It's actually the structure allows for projects. It just utilizes different, I think, more general framing. Like the setting could be like, here we are, and this is our kind of starting point, that we have these kind of skills, we have these kind of operations, etc., and so on. It also describes inputs, which include roles, which can be like, so roles could be, for example, like, oh, we need a coder for this, or we need somebody who is good at writing for this. And this could be, a role could be a particular person. That is, somebody proposes, I would really want, say, you, Pablo, or Jakub, to be part of this. Or it could be a role that, oh, I would really like somebody who's good at writing for this. Like, both are roles. One is more general, one is more specific, but they're both in the same family. But the inputs are also things like, okay, we need like a certain kind of software for this, or whatever that is. But that could be essentially like itemizing things that are hurdles, necessities for producing, and then finally, maybe in the list actually should be earlier, is the aim or resolution for that scene, which is like for the project, this could be that, okay, we're in this setting, this is how we want to change things. It could be, for example, like making our operations more functional, like making a teaching material for our operations. I'm using our organizational material here as a kind of semi-example. So, so we are in a situation that we have many good starting points, but it's hard to bring other people in because we have to explain everything from the starting point. Then the aim is to have material that makes it easier to bring people into these operations in an expressible form of a document or software. And then inputs could be a writer, a designer, optionally a programmer. If the programmer is filled, we also can make a program out of this. That's proposing a scene. And then for this, the tokens that are issued, like from this initial tokens, anybody can propose that we'll put a token from here or from, let's say, the I have to check the document in itself to have the phrasings. So let's say from the metaphorical triangulation or from the fishing or whatever they end up being, somebody could propose that, okay, this scene actually kind of takes these things forward. So because they issue a token in and of themselves, potentially somebody proposes that we'll put a token there. And what this token can mean, everything is modularly designed, is that actually the growth of tokens that happens here by production, which I think is a good thing, is distributed to things that are taking the thing forward in itself. But it kind of comes from other members in themselves. So this will not be the initiator who proposes this. So let's say I propose this sort of a scene, and somebody says, I think this actually takes the triangulation forward. I'm proposing this, and then somebody comes to support it, which is essentially they add themselves to the proposal, and this, with whatever ratio percentage, could become a way to decide, okay, this token for this month is here. And then the rest of the structures are kind of relying on others. Like there's also the general tokens, for example, in the structure are thought that if some tokens become unused, like let's say the phishing generates a token every cycle, but then if they don't get used in the scene, they become general tokens. So somebody can propose, oh, this project is generally useful, but I would propose that it also takes these tokens we have left over, we haven't used from earlier generations, and I would also put it here. And then these inputs and roles are slottable, like somebody who is a programmer, which is a tag structure, which we don't have to come to now in the summary, but they can say, I want to help this project, so I become a programmer here. I'll put myself, because I'm a programmer, into this project. And this actually, it's not so much actually a decision, even though it has that ultimate quality, but it decides it by participation. If there is tokens that are resources, and if there's people that fulfill the needs, if all the inputs are fulfilled, the scene starts to move towards its resolution. I know that's a very short summary and kind of cuts out some of the maybe necessary parts, but I think that hopefully works as a summary. If there's any questions on that, I'm certainly open because like I said, cutting out many parts probably leads to many questions. But it's essentially taking this sort of role-playing scene formation as project formation as an mechanic of its own.
Thank you very much for clarification. Yeah, I have questions, but I'll probably put them in the Telegram in the coming days.
Especially, definitely put it, because I'm kind of encouraging more conversation into Telegram. I'll put actually a couple of interesting links in the coming days, partly because of that. But yeah, like it would be actually good if you put them in the Telegram.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. So bye.
Bye. Pablo, any questions?
Not really. This has been great. Really, this is what I call fun, actually. So,
Good.
yeah.
Good. I think actually playing through this is ultimately more fertile. Like I think it's always a little bit of a hurdle to step into this sort of play-like structures, but it's ultimately more useful, I think.
Yeah.
And really gets out this sort of like what are the problems and what are the possibilities. And the more we get into this, there's actually, I think, also more interest there. There's already kind of like a couple of more game designer people who are kind of interested in joining it.
Yeah, I think that will be a great input to have, definitely.
Yeah. So I think it was a good testing of a draft. The whole point, it's not ready. And some of the things like the scene probably needs some fiddling around. But I do think from here, whether we get there or not, there is, first of all, like an organizational principle, like which is like how you can create a fully tokenized organization, which by default actually brings a strength that you can fully distribute. Like
Yes.
you like, because the token issuance or giving people to token is modular, like it doesn't have to be 5 to everybody. You can put any kind of model how tokens are obtained into this. There's no centrality in the sense. It's just protocols. Of course, you could make it central by saying like only these people get the tokens, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's not rooted in centrality. Those are strengths, but it's also like, in addition to that, it's a way to open this avenue of, oh, we can actually kind of form organizations in this manner. We can have this sort of distributed nature. We can, with this kind of model, say, even do a helicopter drop to interesting people of certain tokens, and then they have a possibility to joining here. All these kind of possibilities that are used to some extent, but not too much, certainly on the kind of organization level. And I do think that might be an interesting opening. We can see where that goes, but I think it's something that is not completely missing, but certainly kind of underutilized in current organizational and crypto, whatever,
Yes, for sure.
discourse.
Yeah,
but hey,
very interesting mechanism. Now, to just like the allocation of energy becomes very tangible, right? Like that's very useful in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like I think because it's actually quite flexible, because like like the scene could be done in many other ways. Like and then you have a different allocation. If you do the original distribution in a different way, you have a different allocation. It's really like a branching path. Like you're opening this new avenue, and then there's a branching path underneath it. But you're right that it very much goes into this realm of energy allocation, energy distribution, also attention as well.
Yes.
Like I have a very rough model to think about. Like in addition to tokens, you have this like almost like a personal playing piece, and you can put it into, say, max 2 scenes every cycle, like every month, say, like that you don't, or you put a token and yourself, or you don't put a token, but you put yourself, like, I'm interested in this project, and that becomes like, it actually is worth the same as one token, to keep it simple, but it's really like your personal value that you that represents your work, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, so that this is kind of interesting because it emphasizes the flexibility of token models and moves them into the sort of game design, utilizing the flexibility from that. So it's a kind of double flexibility in terms of structures. But hey, thanks.
No, thank you.
And you get points for being
Here,
final.
always at the latest stage. Yeah.
yeah, that definitely gives you points. But I think it was a good test, and anyway, I don't think this should be like too much longer than these sessions. Like, it's good to keep them short enough. So
Yeah, I agree.
good for that. But let's see how we continue. Any wishes on that, actually?
No, not really. Whatever comes to your mind. Like, I'm very happy with how it's been flowing. So yeah.
I mean, one possibility is to continue this. But yeah, let's actually, once again, to encourage this Telegram talk, there could be like a proposal in there and some conversation there, like, let's see. But and even other forms of conversation, it's completely possible. But let's see where we get.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Very nice. Okay, thank you.
And now I stop sharing once I figure out how to do the stop sharing. First, stop